Wiglaf got the crew to haul the Sea Eagle out of the sea and make camp. The beach was narrow, the sand coarse and grey, almost black. A path twisted upward between tumbled rocks, but mist still clung to the cliff tops, and it was impossible to see where it led. Gunnar stood at the bottom, looking up. Forgive me for asking, said Wiglaf, but what's your plan? Leave him alone, said Thorkel. Can't you see he's thinking? I was only asking, snapped Wiglaf. No need to be grumpy. Me? Grumpy? Said Thorkel. You're the grumpiest man I know. Soon they were wrangling again, the crew looking on and laughing. Gunnar tried to block out their voices, but it was impossible. After a while, Rorik came over him. When in doubt, do anything, said the big man. That way you'll probably make something happen. Why don't we head inland, you and I? Thanks, Rorik, said Gunnar. What would I do without you? Rorik smiled, and they set about preparing for the journey. Thorkel grumbled when he realised he wasn't being invited along, but not much. Wiglaf gave them cloaks and some dried fish and flasks of water. He also gave Rorik a byrnie and a sword from the Sea Eagle's weapon chest. At last, they were ready. Well, take care, said Thorkel, and don't worry, Wiglaf will wait. Thorkel raised his hand in farewell, and they started up the path, Rorik taking the lead. They soon entered the mist, which grew thicker as they climbed. At the top of the cliffs, the path disappeared into it a few paces ahead. Suddenly, Gunnar felt a cold breeze stirring, and the mist parted as it had done at sea. He heard the beating of wings and harsh cawing, and a pair of ravens flew out of the mist to land in front of them. They cawed again, leapt back into the air, and flew off in the direction from where they had come. Gunnar and Rorik turned to each other and grinned. They followed the birds. They walked across empty rocky country, the ravens just keeping ahead of them. After a while, they arrived at a gorge, its entrance flanked by huge stone pillars, and at that moment the sun burned through the mist. Gunnar looked up and was amazed to see a colossal rainbow arching across the sky. One bright end was grounded in the gorge, the other lost in the distance. Bifrost, said Rorik. So, such a thing really does exist? Why, of course it does, said a booming voice, and a red-bearded giant appeared. He wore a shining silver helmet and a silver byrnie that reflected the colours of the rainbow bridge. In one hand he carried a tall spear, its perfect leaf-shaped blade gleaming in the bright light. Gunnar knew this was no mortal. He must be Heimdall, he said, remembering what Odin had told him. And you must be Gunnar, the boy who wants to visit Valhalla, boomed Heimdall. Odin told me to keep an eye out for you, and not to stand in your way. He's impatient to see you. Your quest is almost over, Gunnar, said Rorik, slapping him on the back. It won't be long before you're on your way home with your father. Gunnar smiled and they stepped forward, but Heimdall barred Rorik's way with his spear. Only the boy, Heimdall said. Odin didn't speak of you. Rorik scowled and half pulled his sword out of its scabbard, ready to fight the god. Gunnar put his hand over Rorik's, stopping him. Don't worry, he said. I'll be fine. Go back and wait with the others. Very well, said Rorik, his eyes still fixed on Heimdall's. Then he turned to Gunnar, his face troubled, as Gunnar remembered it from their night on the drowning posts. My brother's name was Olaf, said Rorik. He died bravely, so he might be up there. If you see him, tell him... I will, Rorik, said Gunnar. So, Heimdall, what do I have to do? Just go to the foot of the rainbow. Heimdall lowered his spear and moved aside. You'll work it out from there. Gunnar went past him to the gorge, a jagged crevice in the land, with rock walls rising on both sides. He walked towards Bifrost, and as he got closer, he began to make out the colours blending into each other. Red, yellow, green, purple, the whole thing like a giant column of magical sparkling ice. He looked back. Rorik was watching intently from the entrance to the gorge, Heimdall next to him. Gunnar carried on until he was less than an arm's length from the bridge. He looked for steps within it, but found nothing. He went closer, took a deep breath, and touched the rainbow. His fingertips tingled, and he was pulled inside. Then he felt himself being flung upwards at incredible speed. He was flying in the colours, helpless as an autumn leaf caught in a fast-flowing river, and screaming at the top of his voice. Then it was over as suddenly as it had begun. Gunnar flew out of the rainbow and rolled over and over until he came to a halt. He lay face down for a moment, gasping for breath, and only raised his head when he heard the sound of ravens cawing. The same two birds were standing in front of him, staring at him with their beady black eyes, their heads cocked to one side. "Hugin and Moonin," he murmured. "How did you get here?" "They live here, Gunnar," said a voice. "At least they do when they're not being my eyes and ears. Welcome to Asgard, home of the gods." Gunnar looked up. He was on a path that climbed a short, rocky slope. At the top was a great throne carved from stone, and sitting on it was a smiling Odin. He wore a long white robe and was bareheaded, but otherwise he was the same old man Gunnar had met at the god house. Above them, the sun was shining in a blue sky, although a pale moon was also visible. The ravens flew to Odin, settling on the throne like sentinels behind him, one on either side. Gunnar stood there for a moment, taking it all in, amazed he was truly there. But then he remembered all that had gone before, and resentment swelled in his heart. "I suppose I should thank you," he said. "You were generous to me at the god house, and I would have drowned if you hadn't given me that knife in Kaupang. But why did you let it all happen? Why did I have to suffer?" The ravens squawked, but Odin just laughed. "If I didn't know before that you weren't afraid of anything, I'd know now," he said. "How many other boys would talk to me like that? How many men?" "You haven't answered my question," Odin sighed. "I can't control what happens in your world, Gunnar. Scully was right about man being wolf to man. You mortals do terrible things to one another. Always have done, always will. But Rorik was right as well. 'Tis the Norns who weave everyone's fates, even mine. There's no escape from fate." "So why did you help me?" "Because you made me an offering of the only precious thing you had." Odin held out a hand and showed him father's amulet in his broad palm. How strange to see it after all this time, Gunnar thought, and to know in whose palm it lay. But how fitting too. His journey had begun with the amulet, and now the journey was ending with it. It seemed his quest was over. Though he had other questions, he hardly dared to ask. Gunnar raised his eyes to Odin. "Is father here?" he said, his voice a whisper. "Can I see him?" "Turn around, Gunnar," said Odin. "He's been waiting for you." Gunnar did as he was told. Father was behind him, smiling as he always used to when Gunnar came home to the steading after a day running wild in the forest or out along the great fjord. He was dressed as he had been on the night of the hall burning, but there was no bloodstain on his tunic. "Is it really you, father?" said Gunnar, his heart leaping. "Yes, Gunnar," said father, hugging him. "It's really me." Gunnar hugged him back, surprised to find himself as tall as father now. He stood back to look in his father's eyes, and then turned to Odin. "I have one last favour to ask you. Will you let my father come home?" The smile on Odin's face vanished like the sun behind a thundercloud, and he uttered 5 words that hit Gunnar like hammer blows. "No, that can never be."